It's 2024 and they've gone and done it again. We're back with another attempt from the United States government to tell everyone how video games are causing violence in the world, creating extremists, and most importantly, how they plan to stop it all. This time, the leading cause of extremism is apparently content creators, live streamers, and of course the returning classic, memes. I read this 45-page document that was created by a branch of the US government, so come with me on this magical, mystical, and often confusing carpet ride to discover how you, once again, are the problem. First things first, who exactly wrote this report and what's the overall goal? It was created by an organization called GAO, also known as the US Government Accountability Office. This office is funded by and directly reports to the US Congress, with the lead position being called the Comptroller General, a position that is assigned by the US President. The GAO exists, in their own words, to help the government save money and work more efficiently. They basically get paid taxpayers' money to try and hold the US government accountable in their spending and to try and find problems that need to be solved. This time, the problem they found that needs solving is gaming and social media. I'll read you in their own words why exactly this report was initially created. In recent years, content on social media and gaming platforms that promotes domestic violent extremism has influenced several high-profile attacks, according to experts and agency officials. As a result, some social media and gaming companies, as well as federal agencies, are making an effort to understand and address online content that promotes domestic violent extremism. GAO was asked to review domestic violent extremists' use of social media and gaming platforms. Essentially, they're putting forth the idea, directly, that gaming and social media has contributed to some heinous acts of violence. And I'm not even going to disagree with the premise that social media is a place that people become radicalized or communicate extreme ideas. Nor am I even going to disagree that there are pockets of the internet that foster communities like this. What I am going to disagree with is lumping gaming in there, as well as how they provide almost zero examples of what they claim exists throughout this entire report. Whether you disagree or agree, there needs to be substance to make the claim, but we'll get to that. So let's go over some of the greatest hits of the report. On the very first page, they essentially present a pipeline of extremism that stems from live streamers. The pipeline, in their words, goes from a live stream to video hosting sites, then to social media platforms and forums, eventually landing on user sharing. Now obviously they're not talking about your average Twitch streamer who plays Fall Guys or World of Warcraft. They're talking predominantly about those fringe streamers that are deplatformed from most of the mainstream websites. The types of people who are most likely deep down conspiracy rabbit holes and foster an audience that are probably on the way towards some pretty extreme beliefs. This is a very real thing that exists. My issue with the usage of this, of course, is that there's almost zero context about what or who they're talking about. They just throw this infographic out there. This becomes a much bigger issue when you start to introduce the gaming aspect, which they essentially lump in with this entire report, using the very real social media bubbles of fringe content to smuggle in gaming as some kind of Trojan horse to Congress. This becomes apparent when you look at their inclusion of an ADL, Anti-Defamation League, article, which represents gaming as a whole as some kind of breeding ground for, and I will quote them here, white supremacy. The ADL report I also read, just to make sure I wasn't getting my wires crossed and I had all the information at hand. The GAO essentially used this ADL report to inform what they're talking about here. This is one of only like 8 sources that they cite in this report to Congress. So the ADL article is important to the points that they're making, and the ADL essentially claims that, quote, more than 4 out of 5 adults, 86%, aged from 18 to 45, experienced harassment in online multiplayer games. One of the few things in the article that could explain them reaching these numbers of harassment is this infographic of data, where they asked 13 to 17-year-olds if they experienced harassment and then broke it down by categories. The categories include things like disrupted play, such as trolling or griefing, which made up the largest chunk, and called offensive names, which came in closely behind. So what they're calling harassment is basically if somebody says you're shit at a video game, goes AFK in a ranked match, or intentionally feeds, team blocks you in FPS, something like that, something griefing or trolling you, they're basically using this to present an argument that gaming is full of these really bad people and it's extremely toxic and hateful, which seems pretty fucking out there as a concept to me personally. They then go on to use this data to claim that, and I'll need to quote you on this just to outline how stupid it is, as a result of being targeted by hate in online games, 30% of young players said they always hide their identity when playing online. Now, I've been playing video games online since 1997. I've never once not hidden my identity in video games. I don't make my character name my actual full name. I don't make my character look like me. I don't change my display picture to be a picture of me. Nobody does this. We all inherently hide our identity just by virtue of existing in video games and always have done. We create usernames and gamer handles and tags. So this makes zero sense to me. They're trying to basically say that due to somebody trolling you in a ranked match or calling you shit at a video game, whatever it's going to be, which we all know people do, they all say outrageous things in games to just try and offend you. Nothing about you personally, probably, because they don't even know who you are. The ADL is trying to make this link that due to that, and they've shown the data, the majority of it is coming from these two groups of what they call harassment, to say that this is making young people hide their identity. And if this is what you're putting forward, I have to question your credibility or what your goal is if you're dragging this into your report as if it made any sense or contributed towards an actual point. Now, this is where it gets wild. They also polled kids, literal children, ages between 10 and 17, asking if they had been exposed to white supremacy. They even specifically outlined to the children that by this they mean the exact concept of believing white people are superior to other races and white people should be in charge. That is a quote. Apparently 15% of kids said yes, they have been exposed to this in multiplayer games. At which point I'd ask, what the fuck are kids playing nowadays for this to be the case? You don't have to wait long because the answer is apparently Roblox. Now, I obviously don't play Roblox, but in all my time playing online games, I wouldn't say I've been exposed to white supremacy. I've been exposed to people saying words that they shouldn't be saying to try and offend people. I don't think I've been exposed to actual ideological white supremacy, like somebody speaking out a manifesto or something. Maybe times have changed, but anyway, that's in there. The next section they called ally behaviors, which I'm going to skip for everybody's sanity. The next part is really interesting, actually, to prove a point that I'm trying to make. And this is where they give a statistical breakdown of which games these kids are reporting being harassed in. And since we've seen that they're using trolling and saying bad words as personal harassment in video games, you know exactly which games are going to be at the top of the tree. All the competitive team-based ones, obviously Valorant, Call of Duty, Dota 2, Fortnite, PUBG, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and the list continues. So essentially the ADL has built a statistical basis that claims harassment in online games is growing and causing people to do heinous acts in real life, because kids log on to a competitive game, get told their shit, called some names that are probably based on shock value and nothing to do with them personally because they don't know personally who they are, get trolled. That's what this report is. And just for the record, 3 of the people that were experts that consulted on the GAO's actual congressional report work for the ADL, so were probably in some way involved in this report. This gets worse when they get to the section that they talk about adults and their experiences of harassment. The ADL claims that from their data, 17% of adult gamers experienced doxing, as in having their personal identifying information like full name and address posted online. And that also, get this one, 12% of adult gamers in America experienced swatting, which the ADL define as having a stranger make a false report to emergency services to target somebody. So they're claiming out of 60 million American adults that play video games, 7.2 million of them have experienced swatting, with also 10 million of them experiencing doxing, which I'm just going to say, I don't believe these numbers. I don't believe that they're real. There's no way I could conceive of this being true. Obviously, I know doxing and swatting do happen, but to random people in video game lobbies, at a combined rate of 29% of 60 million people, There's not a chance that that can be the case. That would mean statistically, every game you join of say Valorant or CSGO with 10 people in there, almost 3 out of the 10 have been doxed or swatted before due to a video game match that they played. That number just feels absurdly high and reads like fiction, created to support a narrative that makes gamers appear to be considerably more dangerous than they are. Anyway, that ADL report is a video all on its own. I obviously have gone a little bit deeper into that because this is a large basis for the rest of the GAO report as it pertains to gaming specifically. I just wanted to give you a background on what this report was using when it was presenting this narrative to Congress. This is what they claim is a factual basis for their objective reporting. Now, not only do they use this ADL report as a source, they also use the Department of Homeland Security report called Homeland Threat Assessment 2024, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Department of Homeland Security report called Intelligence Assessment and Data on Domestic Terrorism, a January 6th report on domestic terrorism, a PEW Research Center social media fact sheet, Entertainment Software Association's Essential Facts about US video game industry, and last but not least, the US Secret Service Mass Attacks in Public Spaces report. You can find all of those within the main GAO report, which I will link below. So it seems like most of the gaming inclusion here comes from that ADL report, and that specifically comes from a mass shooting event in Buffalo, which they linked to gaming because the shooter released a manifesto stating he was radicalized by a Roblox custom game, which we've seen before with people claiming after they've done something really bad that a video game made them do it, which is obviously nonsense. It's not engaging in reality. I don't know why we'd believe these people. There's obviously something wrong with them to do that in the first place. So to then say what they've written or said makes them a trustworthy narrator and we should take on surface level what they think did this to them is ridiculous as a concept. It's never the video game, it's always a mental health crisis and a failure of society to help that individual. The avenue or venue for the radicalization is hardly relevant, nor is it ever the actual video game. It's always people they meet who share similar ideas, which then makes it not about gaming at all and about the core issue of mental health and any tool to communicate or find peers. Which is why these reports always miss the mark for me, as they focus entirely on things like gaming being an issue, ignoring the fact that gaming is not the problem and never has been. They totally miss the forest for the trees. You should be trying to solve people's mental health and what's leading them to this path, instead of skipping that step and just saying, let's try to monitor these places where people are meeting. Which again, I think on the totem pole of how people do these things, gaming is probably very low. So let's go back to the GAO report. They then outline, and I'll quote the section, ways that domestic violent extremists use online platforms, and then they show an infographic talking about memes. Essentially saying, and again I don't necessarily entirely disagree, that people use memes to spread a message to a large audience, and then a small portion of people that message reaches and resonates with move to a private communication group. Then, of that small communication group, an even smaller percentage of those people might wind up doing something radical. This is not untrue, this does happen. I know we've all seen some incredibly racist, sexist, or otherwise outrageous memes on social media, and of course you're going to use anything that's popular as a way to convey an idea for anything positive or negative. But I'm going to hazard a guess that most of the time people sharing those, even if they're bad, even if they're memes based on things most people consider bad, they aren't on a mission to recruit people to any kind of cause, and are just sharing them because they find them funny. Obviously I don't agree that they're funny, but I don't think everybody who shares something that's, you know, some kind of way is out there trying to recruit people. And we have examples of this, so that's why I don't rule it out as existing. We can just look at things like involuntary celibate, or better known as incels. These people do see and share these memes, then they end up in a community where they get further radicalized, and then things happen. They have done, we've seen them. The next section discusses the mass shooting in Buffalo and makes an absolutely wild leap of logic. They claim that due to the gunman putting a camera on his head and then carrying out the attack, that he was, quote, replicating the visual style of a first-person shooter game, which is utter fucking nonsense. It's just a convenient place to put a camera, which is why it's used in pretty much every outdoor activity video ever. They just put a GoPro on their helmet. There's zero link to the idea he was trying to replicate anything. And again, this just discredits the report and exposes the clear agenda directly in the face of their stated mission of objective and neutral reporting. The GAO report goes on to make some incredibly silly assertions, such as this section that basically says gamers make friends in games, and some of those gamers might be extremists, so somehow making friends is bad or something. I don't know exactly what the point is here, to be honest. They just say some extremists make friends in games, and that could be a bad thing. The funny section comes up next, where they basically contradict most of what they're claiming with a single sentence that reads, "One expert noted, there is no evidence directly linking violence in video games to real-world violence." But they then go on to immediately hit you with the "however," and then say that extremists will use certain games to target people who play violent ones, and even make their own games to recruit people, which again makes it not about the game, because there are no mainstream games created that have any kind of sizable audience you can point to that exists with the intent to recruit people to extremism. If these are the leaps of logic you're making, you basically can replace the term video game here for written or spoken language and blame the ability to communicate instead of video games, as there's zero way to link any of these things together as a cause, and the actual vehicle for recruitment is just the ability to communicate, which you can do in pretty much every avenue that people use on a daily basis. This is like blaming electronic mail for people being extremists because somebody can email somebody else. Like, yeah, as soon as you allow people to talk to each other, if they find somebody who's into the things that they're into and they're bad things, of course, they're probably going to get together and talk about the bad things. This is nothing to do with video games. This next part's pretty crazy. According to some companies they spoke to, big tech and social media in particular, they assign human workers to specifically monitor people who they believe are, quote, bad actors, not just on their platform either, meaning they employ people who follow them around digitally to other platforms and mediums, compiling reports and keeping tabs on them. That's the social media companies doing that, not the government. That information is then obviously going to be shared with federal government. This next part was pretty funny, to be honest, until I thought about it more. The GAO report links certain profile pictures on social media to violent extremists. They state specifically that many white supremacists use ancient Greek, Roman, and Norse imagery to, quote, create an aesthetic that supports their narrative. Now, this on surface level sounds ridiculous, right? But I'm not gonna lie to you guys. Almost every time I see someone saying some deeply racist or sexist shit on my Twitter timeline, they almost always have a picture of a Roman centurion or some old Greek statue. This was obviously funny to see in a government report because it sounds stupid, but at least anecdotally this one tracks with what I've personally seen. Though obviously the issue lies in grouping people together as if they're all doing that if they have the same profile pictures, because at the end of the segment they specifically state, one of the experts noted that this type of imagery may not directly violate company content policies, but it helps draw others into this worldview, which doesn't even mention the people using these pictures doing anything. It just draws a line under those profile pictures and says they're bad. One last thing I want to highlight, the report also states the federal government is collecting evidence on social media, which we already knew, but now you have it in black and white that if you post some memes that they consider to be an issue, you're probably now on a list. But unlike Santa Claus, where you have to do something really wrong, it could just be you posting a Pepe or something, which, let me remind you, the ADL still considers a hate symbol. Have no fear though, because the federal agency responsible for collecting your memes and your social media information does not join Discord servers, so gamers are mostly safe from this. They're not really allowed to go anywhere where they would be required to interact with you directly, presumably due to entrapment or something like that, so they just stick to public places. That being said, throughout these reports there are also claims that Discord is a bad place, and also somehow complicit in creating extremists and radicals, just like gaming apparently is. The reason they come to this conclusion is solely because it can be used for bad people to communicate, which again, anything online can be used to communicate by bad people, but they obviously feel the need to point at gaming and Discord specifically. So to me, clearly this report was completely lacking in any form of evidence, factual or objective reporting, despite the claim that that's what the GAO exists to do. They use terrible reports from the ADL that make zero fucking sense, to be honest, to lump gaming into the equation when this report should have focused solely on social media, which they can probably make a much stronger case for. Obviously, you've got big people on these alternate social media platforms that do run live streams and post videos that have some pretty extreme beliefs, some nationalistic beliefs, things like that. But you don't see that in gaming. It just seems like another time where gaming's getting blamed for something that it really has nothing to do with, despite not a single study existing that links violence to video games, even the most violent games in the first place. I do want to say that obviously there will be examples and cases of people finding each other in video games and then going on to a private server somewhere and eventually maybe doing something radical like the report claims. That's common sense. Any avenue where people can communicate with each other presents the opportunity for this to happen. And obviously the games that host user-generated or created content, such as, for instance, Roblox, are games that are more likely to have this occur. Games that host player-generated content as well as games for children probably do need more strict monitoring and moderation for exactly those reasons. But to take the entire gaming industry and just throw that to the wolves over a concept that is so common sense and apparent, with zero evidence of any of the claims outside of saying it can happen, is wild for a government agency to be doing. They may as well say the internet, the postal service, the local town board, talking in the street, the telephone system, or any form of communication is the issue. That would make just as much sense as saying specifically gaming is the problem. What bothers me most is that these reports always present everything as bad. They state that gamers can become radicalized, but they don't mention that gaming can also bring people together, create friendships, help people who might be struggling with isolation or on the path to radicalization by bringing them into situations with other gamers who enrich their life and unknowingly bring them back from a dark path. They would rather pretend that gaming is somehow an issue or that any of these problems are inherent to the medium. Gaming can give people a place to belong, introduce them to kindness, companionship, and understanding, but in their world, they only see the bad. And the scary part is that the report was accepted, with the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI agreeing to their recommendation, which is incredibly vague in the first place. But anyway, there we go. Another example of gamers bad. There was over 250 pages of documentation here between the sources. So if you want to go read, enjoy. It will all be linked in the GAO report, which you'll find down below. And remember, next time you post a meme, they're watching you.